What's going on, everybody? So today I'm going to be answering the question of could indigenous people be vegan? And the reason why I wanted to address this topic is because I am someone who does a lot of research on indigenous people, and that is because, my friends, I myself am indigenous as well. So because I'm an indigenous person and because I do so much research on indigenous cultures, I felt like, and as also as a 4-year vegan, I felt that I should be one to put this out there and kind of answer it, answer it for people that aren't indigenous, because for some reason I've noticed that a lot of people that talk on this subject are not indigenous themselves, yet always use veganism as like this evil colonizer mentality and all this stuff. So I'm going to debunk that, and I'm also going to add a lot of information and context into the plant agricultural development of indigenous peoples, and we're going to also answer the question if an indigenous person could be vegan today in the modern day and age, or even back then, pre-colonialism. So yeah, that's what we're going to be addressing today. And we're going to start off with addressing the differences between indigenous people. So a lot of these people that speak out against indigenous people being vegan, like I said, are not indigenous. And they also have these preconceived notions, these ideas that all indigenous people are the same, and that every indigenous culture just hunted. Everyone just hunted like all day, every day. Now, I'm not saying that there's probably not one indigenous American tribe, in the Western Hemisphere that did not hunt at all. That's not what we're talking about here. I'm not saying that they didn't hunt at all, okay? But what I'm saying is people have this preconceived notion of like the Plains Indians, for example, or the people that live up north in Alaska and Canada, Inuits and Eskimos, and they assume that all indigenous people have this kind of culture, that indigenous people are just like nomadic or sedentary in the case of the northern tribes, as these extreme hunters, that chase the buffaloes and hunt seals and things like that, or just typical woodlands tribe that hunted deers and stuff like that. So again, this is a preconceived notion that all indigenous tribes live this way to such an extent, right? Because the argument is not that they didn't hunt at all. The argument is that different tribes hunted a lot differently than others, and different tribes hunted a lot more than others. So for example, the Plains Indians predominantly lived in a desolate environment where they had to kill what could sustain itself out there in order to survive. Same way with the Inuits and Eskimos. They live in a desolate environment where their means of survival means they have to kill things that can sustain themselves in such an environment. Okay, so again, for survival's sake, these people had to do what they had to do. Not the same as the people that had agricultural development. So again, not all tribes are the same. Not all tribes hunted the same. Not all tribes had the same lifestyle or ideology. Just wanted to get through the kind of setting the template here for the fact that there's much more differentiation to indigenous people than people give indigenous people credit for, I guess. I don't know if it's credit, but you get what I'm saying. Now, given that we just went over these plains tribes and these hunter nomadic peoples, and also these sedentary agricultural people, let's talk about population difference, because as anyone who's ever studied Civilization or played the game Civilization, great game, would know that food increases population. Okay, so what in turn would determine, I guess, the overarching sustainability of a indigenous civilization indigenous civilization would be their population, right? So if we look at these nomadic tribes, these hunter tribes, these tribes that lived in desolate environments, again, populations are typically not too high per clan or per tribe, right? Maybe 1,000, maybe a few thousand at most. That's stretching it, but typically, you know, not too big. Maybe sometimes, you know, more likely in the hundreds, or maybe not even there. So that's the population of these nomadic tribes, these people that live up north in the cold, that have no way to, you know, sustain themselves from plants. Not very large population. Now, when we see ourselves looking at agriculturally based civilizations, we see the Mississippi Valley, we see the Mesoamericans, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Arawaks in the Caribbean and in South America. We see the Incas in the Andes, right? So we see these agriculturally based civilizations, and their numbers tend to hit higher than hundreds of thousands, arguably even to millions in some cases. So this was a proponent of plant agriculture, because clearly you cannot sustain people from killing every animal in sight. It's impossible. Not only that, but most of these people had some kind of adherence or understanding of an ecosystem, right? So they would never do something to throw an ecosystem off balance to such an extent by literally wiping out millions of animals in order to sustain millions or hundreds of thousands of people. Wouldn't make any sense. So this brings me to my next point, which is agricultural technology and worship. So when we look at these agricultural societies, agricultural tribes, agricultural civilizations, they tend to have certain advancements that came from the development of plant agriculture, such as the Chinampa system invented by the Mesoamericans. So Chinampas, for those of you that don't know, are little land pads on top of the water that people used to further grow more plants, more crops, because, you know, they wanted to basically sustain such a large population that they had to create this Chinampa system in order to feed so and so amount of people, right? So this is an example of agricultural development and technology. Same way with the Incas, who implemented terraced farming. Terrace farming meant that they etched into the sides of mountains where they lived in order to sustain themselves by being able to produce more and more of their plant crops in order to keep their populations up, right? So these are great examples of agricultural technology and development, and it's all centered around plant agriculture because, for another point that I'll bring up later, there is a plethora of plants here that are indigenous to this side of the world, and these people took advantage of said plants and cultivated them and have developed technologies based off of them. So again, when we look at you know, why these people invested into plant agricultural systems and plant agricultural technologies, plant agricultural gods, there's a god of corn. Okay, there's a god of corn. There's also a god of yucca, the root that grows in South America and in the Caribbean. And we see the amount of praise for plant agriculture. This does not mean that these civilizations did not eat meat at all. That is a lie. Of course they did, or fish, right? Fish is meat. That's a video I have to make too, because people don't think fish is meat. But anyway, you see how these people invested so much time into the production of plants. Again, this does not mean that they did not hunt at all, but clearly it is much more sustainable in this situation and in situations all over the world. Is how, you know, we have our population the way we do now, is that because of these plant agricultural advancements, we have allowed for people to grow to such great population at a healthy, sustainable living, right? Now, for people that would argue and say that even then, after everything we've discussed already, people might say, well, yeah, but the predominant source of their nutrients came from animals and this and this and that. Well, for some cases, yes, like I said before, the people that lived in desolate environments, most of their nutrients came from animals they had to hunt and kill. People that lived in agricultural societies did not have to rely off of other animals as much for food. They relied on plants, and this is largely to the lack of domesticated animals here in the Western Hemisphere that are indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. For anyone who didn't know, that never took a history class before or has ever looked into world trade or the history of world trade, there was no cows, there was no pigs, there was no chickens here. So these livestock animals that people use as food sustainability were not even present here. Now, of course, there might be some subsidiaries. There are tapirs that are indigenous. There are guinea fowl. There are can't really think of another animal that would place. I guess a bison. Is the closest thing to an indigenous cow I can think of. But these animals were wild. They were not easily domesticated, nor did people have an interest in domesticating them, because they at least respected these animals' free will. So, again, lack of livestock animals, right? So therefore, people had to predominantly rely on plants, okay? Now, we see how greatly this affected these people on this side of the world when a famine hit. Because yes, a famine hit this entire part of the world that destroyed a whole bunch of corn. And corn is like the lifeblood of indigenous people, literally from like top to bottom, from as far north as, I don't know if corn made it to Alaska, but it made it to a lot of northern tribes, also made it all the way down into South America. So when a famine begins, these ecological disasters start to affect the corn and a lot of other agricultural crops, then this leads to scarcity of food, causes population decline, causes more war, causes more human sacrifices, causes more problems, period. And this is what the colonial period came into when Europeans came here to colonize this side of the world. That's when they decided to come, was at this point during and after the famine. Moving forward, let's talk about the vast variety of plant foods that are indigenous to this side of the world. So we have so many plants here that a lot of people have based their food off of, and yet that plant wasn't even indigenous to where they came from. A great example are tomatoes. Tomatoes, what would an Italian kitchen be without tomatoes? Guess where tomatoes are from? Mexico. You know who cultivated them? The Aztecs, the Mexica. So Italians, you can thank those people for cultivating your tomatoes. Also, potatoes. Literally every species or every kind of, let's put it that way, every single kind of potato to ever have evolved naturally in the existence of the world evolved in the Andes in South America, and it was cultivated by the Incas. So yes, potatoes aren't Irish. They are in fact Incan, if anything. We also have the yucca root, which is heavily used in producing breads or tapioca. Also, you have a variety of other things. I don't know why I'm going so slow. We're going to speed things up. You got peanuts, corn, avocado, you got squash, you got peppers, you got blueberries, pineapples, cranberries, and so many, many more. But I'd be here all day if I were to tell you every single plant that is edible, that is indigenous to the side of the world. Would it be wrong for an indigenous person to be vegan and per se incorporate these plants into the majority of their dishes? No, it would not be wrong at all, and it would not be against your people. It wouldn't be against your ancestors or any of those things. Now, of course, like I said, there are different kinds of indigenous people. If you're a descendant of, a Great Plains tribe, or, someone from a desolate environment, or someone that, some group of people that never became sedentary agriculturalist civilizations, this is not a disrespect or knock on those cultures. However, again, what veganism is per se is simply an ethical stance. So even if you are from one of those kinds of tribes, it is not wrong if you personally decide that you just don't want to partake in the harm and suffering of animals, or try to minimize the suffering of animals as much as possible. Again, never claimed in this video that my ancestors were vegan or that any indigenous tribe was vegan. I'm simply stating that if someone decided to do that back in the day, they absolutely could. In most of these places, maybe not all, but in most of these places in the Western Hemisphere, it was possible, and it still is possible, even more so today. So anyway, thank you guys for watching the video. Let me know what you think. Comment below. Let me know if you want to debate this topic or any of those things. I'm prepared, or will be preparing, for said debate if you wish to debate me about it. But again, thank you guys for watching. Like, subscribe, all of that good stuff, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.